After our last meeting, I had several new experiments and ideas I wanted to explore in regard to the material collages. However, first I wanted to try and execute an idea I'd had last week but I'd run out of time, the letterform series. I spent some time on Thursday crafting these collages. The difference between these and past experiments is that here I focused on the seams of the letters, trying to make them appear like a single solid object, even though the shadow and the background say otherwise. Originally, I had wanted them to slowly shapeshift from one form into the next, like a stop-motion film, the letterform barely moving from the center of the screen. These, however, seem to jump around randomly. I'm not sure if it's worth it to keep pursuing this direction, to try and illustrate what's in my head, or if these slight jumps add character and charm, further adding to the confusion of what the viewer is looking at. Over the weekend, I began working more on the material studies, intending to craft more collages. I started out by experimenting with more color gels, layering warm over warm tones and cool with cool, and finding that it produces a very vibrant, intense color palette. From these, I decided to experiment with photographing an existing print, which is what I began exploring here. Using a print in the background, I layered different materials, gels, wood, cut logs, over to see what stood out. Initially, I worked with what was already in the original image and slowly began to include other elements. I also tried using my computer screen to display a print to photograph, which, in the way that I was using it, didn't appear any different than a printed image. In reviewing these later, none of them spoke to me like their original counterparts. Though I initially tried to use minimal elements in the work, I felt it came across as a mirror or matchy, which isn't what I was going for. On Monday, I went back to experimenting with wood and minimal metal to create more of the hardscapes I had originally made for my photography final. This time, I decided to try and shoot my objects from overhead. This adjustment allowed me to compose in a way that was very different from what I'd done the first time. I was able to align, stack, and layer more easily, sometimes adding in plexiglass and gels for color. Tired of plain wood samples, I grabbed a wooden O to see what would happen. The frame of the macro lens transformed the letterform to geometric shapes. I continued exploring, adding in additional letters, focusing on the shapes made by the negative space. I then exported these and began to continue the collage exploration. Initially, I worked with elements from previous weeks, which are the images you see here. And then I began using new material. With these pairs, I was being much more intentional when composing shape and color, leaning into suggested geometric patterns. There seemed to be many different directions I could go with these images. I could try combining them all together, which is what I've been experimenting with. I was also curious about using some of the mill images I took or the found ones I'd scanned in. After some composing, those too seemed like they could have a place in the work. The other project I wanted to revisit, and hopefully finish this week, was the wooden window frame. As a reminder, this is the part of frame I'm currently working on. We'd cut the damaged part in order to upgrade the wood with the new piece. I had a few observations here. The first is that though we tried, it is nearly impossible to create an exact physical replica of the part that we'd cut off. It looks similar, but it doesn't quite fit like the original, and the dimensions are ever so slightly different. The second observation is that I was very adamant about my desire to upgrade the piece of wood with an exact replica. I almost wonder what would have happened if I had tried to replace the part with a piece of dramatically increased dimensions or a completely different style. That's it for this week. Thank you.